There is something in common in movements and organizations like the Black Panther Party, Occupy, the Communist Party, the Socialist Party, and other groups that seek to unite people across a broad spectrum of differences instead of oppress people because of differences, as is our current status quo here in America. That something in common is all of these organizations that strive to fight the effects of racism as one of their goals, meet coordinated state repressions on many levels, including from the police. That repression is directed at dividing and conquering the people. I'm going to try to introduce our next speaker without falling out right here on the stage. Angela Davis is a woman who has been deeply involved in the continued quest towards social justice. She spent the last 15 years at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where she is now Distinguished Professor Emerita in the History of Consciousness program. It's an interdisciplinary PhD program. She also teaches feminist studies there. Angela Davis is the author of 9 books. Her most recent book is The Meaning of Freedom and Other Difficult Dialogues. She has lectured throughout the United States as well as in Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia, and South America. In recent years, a persistent theme of her work has been the range of social problems associated with incarceration and the generalized criminalization of those communities that are most affected by poverty and racial discrimination. Davis is a founding member of Critical Resistance, a national organization dedicated to dismantling the prison industrial complex. On behalf of the Justice for Alan Blueford Coalition, I introduce Angela Davis.
First of all, it's really wonderful to be here this evening. I am so honored to be able to be present at this event, which pays tribute to the tragically short life of Alan Blueford, who would have celebrated his 19th birthday, I believe, on Thursday. As a long-time resident of Oakland, I think I've lived in Oakland the majority of my life. I feel personally responsible for having allowed the police of this city to continue their practices of racist violence that date back, at least in my experience, to the 60s, and probably before that. When I think about Alan Blueford, I also think about Bobby Hutton, little Bobby Hutton, who was killed in 1968 by the Oakland Police Department a few days before he would have celebrated his 18th birthday. And speaking of the Black Panther Party, let me say that Elaine Brown is in the house this evening. I came into the theater, I was given a letter from Dennis Banks, with whom I served on the Russell Tribunal on Palestine not too long ago. And he writes that I should please give my prayers to those families who are in attendance there with you. And he says, police brutality was one of the main reasons the American Indian movement was formed in Minneapolis, Minnesota on July 29, 1968. Let me say, first of all, that I really love this city. I love the people of this city. I love Laney College. racist police violence in this city. Why do we allow it to continue to happen? And let me say to Geraldine and Adam Blueford, I so admire your courageous stance, and I thank you for the work that you are doing to stir this community to action. Thank you. And I understand that you recently visited with Mumia Abu-Jamal, along with Jack Bryson. And I think the last time I saw Jack was at, isn't that right? Was at a rally for Mumia. And, you know, Jack Bryson, we should also give him a hand. He's amazing. I don't know where you are, Jack. But I just want to say that you have become a model of commitment. You have not wavered, not even for a second since the murder of Oscar Grant. And of course, I was so moved to hear once again the parents of Oscar Grant. I feel touched in so many ways by the murder of Alan Blueford. First of all, Skyline High School is in my neighborhood. When I first moved to Oakland, I lived on 90th Avenue. So I'm so familiar with those places. And let me thank Todd Chrétien and the Justice for Alan Blueford Coalition for inviting me to join you this evening. Oakland, of course, is infamous all over the world for the way the police in this city brutalize the people they are supposed to serve. The name of Oscar Grant continues to resonate all over the country and all over the world, as a matter of fact. And you remember when police attacked Occupy activists last year, the eyes of the world were focused on Oakland. But Oakland is also known for the way we stand up and resist. This gathering is indicative of the kind of city Oakland is. The most radical labor movement in the country, as the real Clarence Thomas pointed out, is located right here in Oakland, ILWU Local 10. And let me say that a few days ago I was in New York, and I had the opportunity to speak at an event with Harry Belafonte at 1199, where I had the opportunity to say that I was proud to be from Oakland, where the ILWU led the struggle against apartheid and shut down the port for Mumia, supported the Occupy movement, and stands up against Israeli apartheid. For justice for Alan Blueford. As Clarence pointed out, we come together to honor Alan Blueford at a time when the entire country is mourning the children and teachers who were killed last Friday in Newtown, Connecticut. And I am very glad that President Obama, and let me say that as many problems as I have with Obama, I'm still glad I can say President Obama instead of President Romney. So I'm glad that he's vowing to do something about gun violence. The U.S. is the only country in the entire world where so many people have guns. There are over 300 million civilian guns circulating. And the population of the country is only 315 million, I think. And if we count the guns that belong to the police and the military, there would be many, many more guns than the population of this country. And why do people think guns are the key to security? There was a Republican elected official, I can't even remember his name, I was so shocked by what he said. But he said that if the teachers at Sandy Hook Elementary School had been armed, they could have shot the kid before he killed so many people. The answer to gun violence is more guns. More guns to solve the problem of guns. I do believe we need gun control in this country. But controlling gun violence will also have to mean taking guns out of the hands of the police. From everyone, but especially from the police and the FBI and ICE. And especially from ICE. We talk about all of the young Black and Latino men who are victims of racist police violence. Let's also talk about all the people who were shot for no other reason than looking for a better life across the border. And we know that Black and Latino youth are subject to a vicious process of criminalization. A process of criminalization that is ideological and it's also psychological. That is to say, Black and Latino youth have been so consistently represented as criminals that the mere sight of young men who are Black or Latino can strike fear into people's hearts. And it seems that this is what happened on the morning of May 6th, when Alan Blueford was racially profiled by the Oakland police and murdered. Many people assume that Black people, Latinos, other people of color are simply more inclined than others to commit criminal acts, more inclined to take drugs or deal drugs. But study after study has indicated that, as a matter of fact, young white people do drugs as much or more than young people of color. And they also engage in the trafficking of drugs. So the difference is surveillance. The difference is what the Black Panther Party used to call the occupation of our communities by racist police forces. That is the only difference. And also those who assume that Black and Latino kids are more inclined to be criminal forget that they have historically constituted the easiest targets of law enforcement since the aftermath of colonization and slavery. So if you look at the way in which Native Americans, Latinos, Black people, and many Asian youth have been racially profiled by the police, there is a long history of that process. As a matter of fact, I think we have to take into consideration the fact that institutions have much longer memories than individuals. Institutions have much longer memories than individuals, even when it is no longer possible to commit individual acts of racism with impunity, or at least to be explicit about the racism in that act. Institutions continue to act in ways that promote and perpetuate racism. Police violence here in Oakland, police violence in New York. As a matter of fact, the movement against stop and frisk in New York has become so powerful that not long ago they arrested one of the main leaders of that movement, Jazz Hayden, because he was videotaping the police. And as a matter of fact, attempting also to carry out the legacy of the Black Panther Party when they patrolled the streets of Oakland and monitored the arrests that the Oakland Police Department was doing back in the 1960s. And so when Jazz was videotaping police arrests, the police found reason to stop him and search him and accuse him of carrying dangerous weapons. The weapons were a penknife and a commemorative bat that he had in his car. And if you followed that case, you know that it took a long time and a lot of struggle to have him released from those charges. Last year, of course, we heard about Trayvon Martin. And we were all really happy, despite the horrendous tragedy. We were all really happy to see the upsurge in resistance all over the country and in many other parts of the world. Now, what happened after George Zimmerman was arrested? Everything quieted down. Do you remember when there was an article in every single newspaper you picked up? Do you remember that Trayvon Martin was in the news every day? But as soon as the police arrested George Zimmerman, somehow or another, many people decided that the goal had been reached. Now, I know it's really important to make these people accountable, individually accountable for their acts, whether they are police or whether they are vigilantes. But racist violence cannot be eliminated simply by only addressing the individual perpetrators. This is where the lessons of prison abolitionism are helpful. Because if there's one thing we know, prisons have not solved any problems. And as a matter of fact, if this is the country that has the largest number of guns in the world, it's also the country that has the largest number of people incarcerated anywhere in the world. 25% of the imprisoned population on the entire planet, 5% of the actual population. Imprisonment creates the illusion that we are addressing the particular problem, when in actuality, oftentimes the problem is being reproduced. And so I think we have to think very deeply about how we address the historical dimensions and the institutional dimensions of racism in a way that will put us on a path to a non-racist society. I mean, we have been dealing with this issue of law enforcement killing people of color forever and ever and ever and ever. It goes back to slavery. It goes back to colonization. And as I said before, while I think we need to guarantee that individuals are rendered accountable, we cannot forget that this is a part of something that is so much greater than individuals. So we have to ask ourselves, how are we going to root out the racism from these institutions like the Oakland Police Department that continue to erupt over and over and over again? Now, this racism is also very much related to mass incarceration, which has been produced by the workings of a global prison industrial complex that is very much linked to the rise of the globalization of capital. And as Clarence Thomas pointed out, this has led to an increased emphasis on profit and not on people's needs. These are the interests of capital. It is profitable for those who control the flows of capital to be able to ignore human need. That is to say, education, housing, recreation, healthcare. And instead of responding to people's needs for health and wellness, for education, for housing, for community, for a collective vision of the future, simply arrest them, stop them, kill them, incarcerate them, and then pretend the problem has evaporated. Take advantage of the fact that there are large populations of people in which generations have suffered under the impact of racism. And you can say that this is, in many ways, a product of the failure to abolish slavery. We are living with the ghost of slavery in the 21st century. They're also products of the genocidal colonization of Native people. That contemporary social problems, which are complicated by the failure to address them historically, can be rendered invisible by arresting people, by killing them, by executing them, by putting them in prison. And then make that whole process profitable. Make that whole process profitable. As health and education move further from the reach of poor people, and especially poor people of color, as health and education are increasingly privatized and corporatized, and incarceration, which is an illusory solution to the problem of the commodification of the means of fulfilling human need, it also becomes privatized and corporatized. Now, I just want to say a few words before I conclude about violence and the interconnectedness of all of these forms of violence, which create so much pain in our lives. And we can, name the young black men, the young black and Latino men who have been killed by police or vigilantes, and they've been constantly evoked during the course of this event. But as we think deeply about Alan Blueford and Oscar Grant and all of the others, I think we also need to recognize that women are also targets of violence. And that the violence that happens in the street has happened on 90th Avenue and in the BART station. It's connected with the violence that happens in more intimate spaces. And I think we have to begin to try to understand the connection between violence that happens within the family and violence that happens in the street. Violence that happens at the hand of the police and violence that happens in the military. You know, where do kids learn about violence? And, you know, why is it that we inhabit such a thoroughly violent society? Virtually every aspect of our lives is saturated with violence. And I'm just suggesting that we think about the relations, the interconnections. As someone who teaches feminist studies, as you heard in the introduction, I'm really interested. For me, feminism is more about understanding those connections than it is simply about focusing on gender, although focusing on gender is really important. And we should acknowledge that women constitute the fastest growing sector of the imprisoned population. And then when we talk about women, we also have to talk about trans women. Both inside prison and outside. And finally, let me say that I just attended the World Social Forum Free Palestine in Brazil last week. And I think when we talk about ridding our communities of the violence that claimed the lives of Alan Blueford and Oscar Grant, we have to talk about violence in other parts of the planet. And certainly our sisters and brothers in Palestine deserve our solidarity. Palestine is the largest open-air prison in the world. And so what are we doing today? We are resisting, we're standing up, we're fighting back because we want a future better than the present that we are living today. And in a sense, we're living a future we could not have imagined a generation or two ago. But what are the futures that we want to strive toward today? And I don't think we should be afraid to imagine the most radical possible futures. You know, even when people say it's impossible. And first on their agenda, on this agenda, would be a future without the racist police violence, a future without the racist violence of the Oakland Police Department. Imagining radical futures requires us to stretch our minds and our vocabularies to recognize that, for example, even if prison abolition or the eradication of violence cannot be achieved in our lifetimes, let us stretch our imagination further than our lifetimes. Further than the lifetimes of our children or our grandchildren or even our great-grandchildren. See, neoliberal ideology does not want us to do that. It wants us to only think about what's happening to this individual in the present moment. And let's just remember that activists like Frederick Douglass or Ida B. Wells would never have been able to imagine our present. But without the movements with which they were associated, we would have no foundation to build radical futures today. Justice for Alan Blueford. Thank you very much.